Hello Internet, Magic Man here again, and now we move on. In our Final Fantasy trading card game series here, we've done how to play, a very comprehensive set of videos, taking you through a lot of advanced rules. Yes, as I've said many times, you can learn the game much faster. My series is aimed more at that person that's kind of considering competitive play and needs more detail. However, it's now time to segue into our basic strategies series, and today we're going to start with one that's been promised in a few previous videos: when to mulligan. Yeah, so let's get to it. Alright, now talking about mulligan, we mean taking your hand of 5 cards at the beginning of the game, and if you don't like it, putting it on the bottom of your deck in any order you want, and redrawing 5 cards. Either player may do this once at the beginning of the game. Fair enough, alright, so if I don't like my hand, I can put it back and get a new one, and hopefully that one will be a little better, because I'm stuck with it at that point. While that's great, that really doesn't leave new players a lot of guidance, and even more experienced players a lot of guidance on what to mulligan. It's basically, hey, when you have a bad hand, try to get a new one. Well, for newer players, and even people playing for a little while, what makes a bad hand? I mean, even in the official Final Fantasy documents, like the mat that comes with the game that teaches you the rules, this is all it has to say on the whole process. Both players draw 5 cards from their deck to build their initial hand. The players are allowed 1 mulligan, or redraw. If they do not wish to keep their hand, they can take the whole 5 cards, put them at the bottom of the deck in any order, and draw 5 new cards. The advanced rules, with the comprehensive step-by-steps, really don't even elaborate on it any more than that. 8213 says each player draws 5 cards from his or her deck. 8214 says the player who takes the first turn may put the 5 cards he or she has drawn to the bottom of his or her deck in any order and draw 5 new ones. This is only allowed once. The player who plays second may then do the same. That's it. It then moves on to 8215 that says the first player is now the turn player and begins the game, etc., etc., etc. So, what is a bad hand? I kind of liken it to somebody just starting out learning how to play poker, right? Basic 5-card draw poker. And you're not familiar with maybe the ranks of the poker hands, so you don't know what's good, what's bad, what's great, what's awesome, what's highly unlikely. You don't know that information yet. You're not all that familiar with it. Maybe you know 3 of a kind is better than a pair, but a straight flush, okay, I'm not very familiar with cards. I'm just learning this. What's a straight flush again? I don't know. Is that better than this? Is that better than that? It's really hard to look at a poker hand of 5 cards and decide whether you want to draw 1, 2, or 3, and what those cards that you want to get rid of might be if you don't have some of that necessary information. So in this video, we're going to try to take a look at some basic times you might want to mulligan. Now, a big disclaimer here, and I'm sure I will say this multiple times throughout the video. When to mulligan is highly dependent on a number of things that may vary based on the goals for your actual deck, whether you go first, whether you go second, what your opponent is playing if you happen to have that information ahead of your match. In some tournaments, you do have time to look at other deck lists, so you can kind of prepare, since Final Fantasy has no sideboard currently for you to swap cards on the fly if needed. So a lot of those factors can change when you would mulligan. They can take what would normally be a bad starting hand and one you would want to mulligan, but if your deck is working with a different synergy, a different strategy, a different end game, maybe that general rule that I give you doesn't apply for your deck. So I'll kind of point out some examples along the way. Let's go with some really basic, top-level, easy decisions on when you might want to mulligan. And I'm going to say might a lot because of all the factors that can go into this. Let's start with the heavy hand, and this could be heavy in a number of ways. This could be forward heavy, this could be summon heavy, this could be monster heavy, this could be backup heavy. Out of those four, the least bad of those situations is the backup heavy. That might not necessarily be a bad thing for a lot of decks. Now, 5 out of 5 being backups, probably not ideal in most cases, but it does mean that in the first turn or two, you can get a couple of backups out on the field and be well ahead of the resource game when you start fading into mid and late game. So it's not terrible, but it's definitely not ideal. And if your deck has a lot of backups in it, it might be worth considering Mulligan and getting a new hand for that. But out of those four, 5 backups is the easiest to deal with. You're going to get a lot out fast. Again, though, going back to our things can change, if your deck is specifically built around maybe a haste mechanic and getting out there quickly in turn 1, 2, and 3 and pegging for a lot of damage, that advice I just gave you, out the window. You can't roll with 5 backups like that, hoping that you top deck the hasty cards that you need to complete that strategy that your deck is built around. Again, general rules here, they may differ. 5 forwards, that's pretty much a no-brainer Mulligan in most cases. Again, rarely I've seen decks that were almost all forwards, and so yeah, you wouldn't Mulligan for that reason in that case. But again, if you have a hand of 5 forwards, you're really pinning yourself, hoping that you top deck a couple of backups to get your resources going, or you're committing yourself to high spends of forwards to get forwards out, in which case now you're looking at your hand deciding, I need to get rid of a forward to put a forward out, or maybe get rid of 2 forwards to put a forward out, depending on cost. Which ones am I willing to let go? Again, deck strategy could change that, but 5 forwards definitely not ideal. And the same applies, I don't think we need to go into detail with summons and monsters, but if you get heavy hands where you're getting 4 or 5 of your forwards, your summons, things like that, you might want to Mulligan in most cases, in most normal situations, unless your deck is specifically tailored to that type of strategy. 5 backups is probably the preferable bad hand to start with, because at least there's some working with resources right off the bat. Maybe can get you some backup advantage, which will make your subsequent turns easier. But there's that element of you're hoping to top deck some important things that aren't backups, and what happens if you don't top deck those. If you have 5 backups, but you just keep drawing backups, little sketchy and not much you can do with. So very heavy hands of 1 or 2 particular types of cards, probably a Mulligan opportunity. Moving on from types of cards, let's take a look at cost of cards. Now, most of your decks probably have a wide variety of costs, anywhere from 1 CP to 9 CP currently in the current version of FFTCG. And maybe you have a smattering of 4, 5, and 6 drops, with maybe that 8 or 9 drop, the boss monster that if you get to late game, something you can drop down to really give yourself some advantage. If you draw a hand, though, of nothing but 4, 5, and 6 costs, regardless of whether they're backups, forwards, monsters, and a nice mix of type, again, this is a situation that, unless your deck is specifically built for, I need to get this expensive card out as soon as possible because it is the linchpin for everything I want to do, in that situation, you probably want to consider a Mulligan. Again, you're putting yourself in a situation, particularly if you go first, right? Remember, first turn only gets to draw 1 card on their turn instead of 2, where you're going to be ditching 2 and 3 cards from your hand to play something that is a 5 or a 6 cost. At minimum, you're getting rid of 2 for a 4 drop. So high cost hand is another one that you probably want to consider putting them down into the deck. and getting yourself a new 5-card hand. Again, disclaimer! I told you to be all over this. If your deck is specifically built around that big beefy monsters, big beefy forwards, get them out as soon as possible, everything else be damned, fine, great. Most decks, that's not the case, but if for some reason your strategy is built on big beefy forwards that you're getting rid of smaller forwards to do, then by all means keep your hand. But generally, a high-cost hand, probably not the ideal starting situation for most decks, and certainly isn't for the starter decks if you're a brand new player. I want to stop for a minute talking about the hands here, and I know we've shown some examples of hands on the screen as we went through here, and talk about the scary side of Mulligan, right? So there's a lot of nervousness or tension sometimes with newer players about taking a mulligan, knowing that whatever are the five top cards of your deck, that is going to be your hand. It is locked in. You have no choice. Also, the scary nature of looking at your initial hand and seeing a card or two that are important to some strategies or some engines you are going to be working in your deck, and now knowing those 5 cards are going to be on the bottom, so a copy of, assuming you're running multiple copies of some important cards, a copy or 2 of those are now at the bottom of my deck. And I want to talk about that for a second. So the first aspect of that, the scary nature of being locked into your top 5 cards, if you take a mulligan, throwing your hand at the bottom, and the next 5 cards, they are what they are. Your first 5 cards were that too, if the game didn't have a mulligan. So while it's kind of scary to, I'm locked into those 5, you had just an equal chance as far as shuffling and cutting of getting that second batch of 5 as your first hand. So don't let that kind of dissuade you. Oh my god, I'm going to be stuck and locked into that. You kind of were to begin with. Guaranteed you are locked into the top 10 cards of your deck once all the cutting is done. You're just going to look at the second group of 5 of those. So you were already locked in. Don't let that make you nervous. More importantly, though, I do see a lot of people that get very nervous about putting a hand on the bottom, even if it's in any order they want, because it could contain 1 or 2 important cards to things that the player might want to do with their particular deck. In most cases, don't be worried about this. Yes, there are some decks where the minute you put those 5 cards at the bottom, they are going to remain at the bottom. And if your deck is built along those lines, knowing that that's going to be the case, then you've already come to grips with that, or you should have by now. A lot of decks, though, most decks have some type of search going on, whether that be searching for a specific forward, searching for a specific backup, a specific summon, searching for this, searching for a dark card, searching for a light card. Most decks have some type of search in it. Not all, but most decks have some type of search in it. Always keep that in the back of your mind. Yes, these 1 or 2 cards that I know I'm probably going to want, and I hope my other copies are near the top of my deck, because these are going to the bottom. If you have a search, the minute you perform one search, doesn't matter that those 5 cards are on the bottom anymore, right? That deck is going to be shuffled by you, shuffled by your opponent, cut by your opponent, and put back. Doesn't mean that the cards are going to be on top or still on the bottom or in the middle. They could be anywhere, but that was the situation before you drew your 5 cards and looked at them and decided to put them on the bottom. So just because you put them there, if you have a search or 2 going on in your deck, realize that they may not be locked there for very long, and those cards may be freed up for a draw. So some things that make people nervous about the mulligan really probably shouldn't. You were locked into the top 10 cards right off the bat as soon as your opponent cut. It's just, do you want the first 5 or the second 5? And if you have at least one search in your deck and you're able to get that search off to go look at it, whether it's X-Burst or something you play on the field, then it doesn't matter that you put those 5 cards on the bottom. They're now shuffled somewhere into the deck. And so your odds didn't change just because you put them on the bottom to get those key cards that you needed. I hope this video has helped a little bit to give you an idea. Now again, I can't go through every scenario and tell you good hand, bad hand, great that you're going first, great that you're going against hasty deck, great that you're going against maybe an earth deck that's got some slower build up and you're going to need some bigger forwards later. Maybe you're going against ice and water or mono ice and you want to get a lot of low cost things in your hand so that you can shell them out really quickly before you start discarding due to ice. There's so much that goes into a mulligan that you're going to have to know your deck first. What is your deck doing? What is the point? And what is the best way to execute that point? And if your opening hand doesn't at least start you on that path, it's probably worth taking the mulligan. Until next time, gang, this is Magic Man saying stay safe and stay out of that break zone.